like some good old amens when they come from the heart, you know. What was I saying now when why don't I cooperate with Dr. Graham's ecumenical meetings? Well, one of the simplest answers is read the book of Romans and see if you can tell me from the book of Romans why I don't. See, put the responsibility back on him. See, the book of Romans shows you why I don't cooperate with Dr. Graham. Because Dr. Graham, they say he preaches the gospel. Folks, he does not preach the gospel as the book of Romans defines the gospel. He does not preach the gospel. And there are different illustrations I can use to show you that he doesn't preach the gospel. For instance, Romans 1:18, the wrath of God is revealed. He says that he's gone on in his ministry. He pretty well leaves out the doctrine of hell and things like that. He says, I think, that he still believes it. Well, after all, your emphasis is what you believe. And if I don't preach it, then I don't really believe it. I want to mention two of these principles of soul winning which I find in the book of Romans. The first is present salvation in a Christ-centered way and not in a plan of salvation-centered way. Present salvation in a Christ-centered way and not in a plan of salvation-centered way. One Christian worker gave this testimony. He said, I preached the plan of salvation and nobody was saved. I preached Christ and souls were saved. Are we to preach the plan of salvation? Of course we are. The book of Romans preaches all the way through the plan of salvation. But what this man meant was you can preach the plan of salvation in a mechanical way. Or you can preach it in a personal way so that eyes are turned to Jesus. Preacher, ask yourself the question, how often have you preached the plan of salvation in a mechanical way rather than in a personal way? Oh, there's an awful lot to be said about that. And for instance, I've got a certain way. Now, we're going to have the wordless book more as we go along in our course. But I've used the wordless book a lot. But I've been conscious of the fact that sometimes I just gave the plan of salvation in a mechanical way. Your heart's filled with sin. Red page, Jesus shed his blood. Let him into your heart's whiter than snow, and then the gold page, you're on your way to heaven where the streets are paved with gold. You see, I say nobody was saved through that. Well, it doesn't mean that if you preach the gospel in the right way, everybody will be saved. I think if you preach it in the right way, you won't have as many decisions. If we preach the full message of the book of Romans, we won't have as many decisions. I've told you that I believe one of the great dangers of today is too many decisions. And you know, a lot of fundamentalists will not go along with Dr. Graham with all his decisions. But they fall into the same snare. They have too many decisions. Too many decisions. You say, well, we want decisions. Yeah, but you know, a lot of them press so much for a decision, never have a church service, that you don't give a decision, and not an invitation for the decision. And really, they do that so much that they don't give Christians an opportunity to grow. And a lot of those invitations ought to be for those who are saved. Dr. McCook emphasized so much that many in the church need just as definite a decision as unsaved people do. And there's great danger of that. Somebody says, well, Mr. Sells, I don't agree with you. Well, I don't agree with myself often. See, when I teach something like this, I realize I'm not giving the full picture. But what I am saying is, check yourself by the book of Romans, because it does give the full picture. It does give the full picture. And I think many of you preachers will realize that there are times you thought you were preaching the gospel when you weren't. And you're just preaching a mechanical plan of salvation rather than Christ Christ himself, the center of everything real. Then the second principle of evangelism is stress the message of complete salvation. Stress the message of complete salvation. The first 8 chapters of Romans deal with the truth of individual salvation, individual redemption. Chapters 9, 10, and 11 of Romans deal with world redemption, world salvation. And you see, I don't really preach the gospel if I don't preach and live. Notice that, and live. Individual salvation and world salvation, world redemption. As you know, I preach in many different churches, and I just love to go to the different churches. Some of them I go to more frequently than others. One is Brother Vernon Pritchard's church, and I find the folks there seem to be so open to the message of the Lord, and it gives me a great joy to be with them. But sometimes I just say something like this in another church, and you just feel it goes in one ear and out the other. You know how we use that expression, if it goes in one ear and out the other, I'm not sure it goes in one ear. You know, but we just use that expression, in one ear and out the other. The whole thing of missions, you know, different ones in the congregation are called on to lead in prayer. And time after time after time, there's no prayer for missions. No prayer for missions. Practically everyone repeats the same thing to start with. We thank thee we can be in thy house today. I'm so glad we can be in the Lord's house today, but I declare we've already thanked him for that 5 times. Let's thank him for something else. And let's pray for something else. Maybe you call me critical. All right, good. Do that, but just check it by Romans. Check it by Romans. Am I giving the message of complete salvation? See, chapters 1 to 8 are individual salvation. Chapters 9 to 11 are world redemption, world salvation. That has to do with what we call missions. And then chapters 12 to 15 to 16 are the outworkings of salvation. You see, we don't really preach the full gospel if we don't lay great stress on the outworkings of salvation and definite applications of the outworkings of salvation. That's the kind of thing that will bring the opposition to a preacher. He can preach and say, we ought to present our bodies to the Lord, and so forth, and then he comes and says, now, your body belongs to the Lord, and if you smoke, you stop smoking. Now, you may not want to say it in exactly that way. Some would say, oh, now, you're interfering with the liberty of the individual conscience. Well, you know, the Surgeon General of the United States has helped us preachers on that a good deal when he's just said that it hurts your body to smoke. Now, I don't see how anybody could doubt that. I know of one lady, one of my relatives, who died from cancer of the throat. She smoked, an inveterate smoker, chain smoker, and just one cigarette after the other, one cigarette after the other. And one day she took her shawl away, her scarf away, and oh, I just almost died when I saw her throat. It was a huge thing, just a huge thing. And not long after that, she died. Well, I'll tell you, but you'll get opposition if you mention definite applications. You know, Pastor Wood takes a definite stand on the way women should dress, and some should say he's butting into something. But I want to tell you, you may not agree with every particular application, but you remember, real preaching includes definite application. Somebody says, well, I can't invite people to come because I know my preacher is going to offend them by something he says. Well, he's not here primarily to get people to come. He's here to preach the whole counsel of God and to live the whole counsel of God and to live the whole counsel of God. Romans lays down this principle, stress the message of complete salvation. There are 2 striking uses of the word debtor. in Romans. One is in Romans 1:14. I am debtor, both to Greeks and to barbarians, both to the wise and to the foolish. I'm debtor. I'm debtor. And then the second use of debtor in Romans is chapter 8, verse 12. So then, brethren, we are debtors not to the flesh to live after the flesh. That is, not to live in our own strength. I'll never take care of my debt to the world. We're debtors to the barbarians, Scythian bond free. We're debtors to all men. I'll never take care of that debt if I don't take care of this debt. Romans 8:12. We're debtors not to the flesh to live after the flesh. You see, a lot of people call that the deeper life. And they say that if you go into this, you get people so centered in themselves that they can't win souls to Christ. It's true we could do it in the wrong way. But I want to tell you, the Apostle Paul laid great stress on this. And many fundamentalists don't realize it. But when they fight what they call the deeper life, many of them are fighting the gospel. They're fighting the full message of the gospel. Oh, we need it. And you take this whole thing of something like dancing. Dr. McQuilkin laid great stress on this, that people in general and young people in particular face surrender to the Lord in terms of definite borderline things. And he laid great stress. One of the things he mentioned especially was dancing. Well, you know, some folks say, well, go on dancing and then witness to your partner. Yeah, you can't witness to your partner if you're disobeying the Lord. And I believe there are clear principles of the Bible that rule out dancing for a Christian. One of my friends used to tell of this young lady who went to the dance floor and she wanted to have a testimony for Christ. And so while she was dancing with her partner, she said, are you a Christian? And he said, no. Are you? She said, yes, I am. He said, then what in the H-E-double-L are you doing here? I spelled the word so it wouldn't shock you too much, but he didn't spell it, he pronounced it. See? Oh, that kind of thing really gets down where you live. And I believe there are a good many parents who will not send their children and young people to this school because of our dress standards. And somebody says, who are you to set the standards? The answer is we're here to follow the Bible. And I believe the Bible has a lot to say about those dress standards. Now that's where you're going to get your opposition preacher. And you say, well, I just have to leave that off. If you do, you're not preaching the gospel. Because Romans gives the whole gospel. You've heard people talk about the Romans road. How many of you have heard that expression? Give the Romans road. I wonder if you agree with me on this. Many who talk about the Romans road aren't really following the Romans road. Because they're giving just a little part of the Romans road. And if I give just a little part of it, I'm not really giving it accurately. Because you see, this part of the Romans road is in terms of all the rest of the Romans road. What parts of Romans do you read to find the Romans road? Chapters 1 to 16. All 16 chapters. All 16 chapters. And that's one reason why Romans is so important in evangelism, that it stresses the message of complete salvation. My 10th general impression of the book of Romans is connected with the letter R. Remarkable completeness. Remarkable completeness. The question naturally arises, what is complete theology? Complete theology is the acceptance of all aspects of the truth. Complete theology is the acceptance of all aspects of the truth. Oh, that's why I need to keep on studying the Bible more and more. You know, a lot of folks have the idea, well, I know my students at the Bible college would often say that when they went home, for the holidays. Somebody found out you're a freshman. You've been in the Bible college for a semester. By the way, there's something in the Bible I wish you'd explain to me. And the student doesn't know what struck him, because he doesn't have any idea what the man's talking about. He's never heard anything like that. And many folks have that idea. But I need to, and they have the idea often, well, Mr. says, I guess you don't need to study anymore because you've been teaching the Bible for years. And maybe some who've been in my classes think I don't study anymore because I repeat a lot from the past, but I find that these things become living to me in a new way. And then I try to get new features. Some folks think I never give anything new because they go to sleep in class, and don't listen to it all. But I need to study the Bible more than I've ever needed to study it. And preacher, the more you are in the pulpit, the more you need to study the Bible. Now that's one danger of fleeing to a new church. Say, well, I've about done my work here at this church. Maybe so, maybe not. It may be that the reason you think you've finished your work at this church is that you're not going forward in your knowledge of the truth, and you're just preaching 6 of one and a half dozen the other. And you're not really going forward and building up people in the things of the Lord. Let me give you an illustration of the complete way in which Romans gives different aspects of the truths. Chapters 9 to 11 of Romans. Romans 9, 10, and 11 are a classic illustration of complete theology. Chapters 9 to 11 are the full mention of God's sovereignty, God's kingship, God's rule. And they're also a full mention of our responsibility. You say, God's sovereign. He's planned everything. So I just go to sleep on the side? I've been faced with this with a Presbyterian background. And I've heard many say, I'm enough of a Presbyterian to believe that what is to be will be. That's not Presbyterian doctrine. That's the doctrine of a lot of Presbyterians. But that's not Presbyterian doctrine. Presbyterian doctrine lays great stress on God's sovereignty and man's responsibility. Man's responsibility. Now listen to these verses concerning God's sovereignty in Romans 9, 10, and 11. And then listen to the verses concerning man's responsibility. Romans 9, 11. For the children being not yet born, neither having done anything good or bad, that the purpose of God according to election might stand, not of works, but of him that calleth. Now maybe you're a Methodist or some other doctrine like that you hold, and you say, well, now that's for Presbyterians. And some Baptists are supposed to believe that, but not for me. That's Bible. That's not Presbyterian doctrine. That's Bible doctrine. Now the Presbyterians have a certain way of approaching that, and we need to check the way we approach it. But that's Bible. That's Bible. And would you ever preach that to a big congregation of people? You see, you'd drive them away. They'd go criticizing and say, I don't understand that, and that isn't the kind of God I believe in. No, but it's the God who's revealed in the Bible. The God who's revealed in the Bible. Romans 9, 15 and 16. For he saith to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, and I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So then it is not of him that willeth, nor of him that runneth, but of God that hath mercy. Oh, that's strong, isn't it? That's strong language. And then Romans 9:18. So then he hath mercy on whom he will, and whom he will he hardeneth. See, he hardened Pharaoh's heart. He hath mercy on whom he will, and whom he will he hardeneth. Many preachers leave that completely out. Say, folks don't understand that, and they'll give them a wrong view of God. You may give them a wrong view of God the way you present it, but the Bible doesn't give them a wrong view of God, and that's in the Bible. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. Oh, I love to preach that. I hope you preachers love to preach it. But folks, do you love to preach Romans 9? Do you love to preach Romans 9? If you don't, you aren't preaching the gospel. Yeah. This is a part of the whole message. This is a part of the whole message. I'll never forget what my pastor at home said about the 9th chapter of Romans. He told me that I asked him one time, after I'd come down to Columbia to teach the Bible college, how are things coming in the church? And he said, Frank, we're having a real spirit of revival in our church. And he said, I think one of the main reasons is that I'm teaching the book of Romans in prayer meeting. He taught the book of Romans in prayer meeting, and then he would choose texts here and there from Romans, scriptures here and there, and preach on them from the pulpit on Sunday. And he said, I've done that in my previous pastorates. And he said, whenever I've taught Romans and preached Romans, I've always had a spirit of revival in the church. I wonder, how many of you preachers have never preached your way through Romans? One of the many blessed things I've found in my fellowship with Brother Giles is that one of the first things he did when he became a preacher was to memorize the entire book of Romans. He beats me on that. I haven't. See, but I have studied it a lot, and I want to keep on studying it. But, brother preacher, preach your way through Romans. Don't just preach what you call the Romans road and then give the invitation. Sure, there are times when you do that. You can't give the whole thing in one sermon. But you can give it in such a way that you take into consideration all the rest of the book of Romans. You see, I can preach the opening chapters of Romans in such a way that I really contradict what comes later in Romans. Or I can preach it in such a way that I'm ready for that which comes later in the book of Romans. All right? Dr. King told me that he's preaching Romans, and he used to say this, I would be scared to death of Romans 9. The verses I've read. If Romans 9 were Romans 1. But he said Romans 9 is not Romans 1, it's Romans 9. You see what he meant? I'm introduced to this wonderful Lord and his love and redemption and salvation through the first 8 chapters of Romans. And then I come to the 9th chapter of Romans. And I say, ooh, that sounds hard. But I have complete faith in the God who wrote that. And I'm not afraid of it. I'm not afraid of him because of the salvation that he's provided in Christ. You see how all these things go together. And have you, any of you preachers, as far as you know, never preached on Romans 9? Could I ask a hand? How many, as far as you remember, as preachers have never preached on Romans 9? No hand? Oh, one that hasn't preached on it. I'll set him right later on. How many of you have preached on Romans 9? Let me see your hand. Good. That's great. But, oh, how we need to. And I tell you, I'm speaking to myself, too. I won't go into that in detail. Now, listen to these verses concerning man's responsibility. And these verses from Romans 9, 10, 11. Romans 10, 13 to 15. Whosoever shall call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. I see, whatever these verses in Romans 9 mean, they don't contradict Romans 10, 13 to 15. How then shall they call on him in whom they have not believed? And how shall they believe in him whom they have not heard? And how shall they hear without a preacher? And how shall they preach except they be sent? Even as it is written, how beautiful are the feet of them that bring glad tidings of good things. Isn't that an unusual expression, beautiful feet? Do you have beautiful feet? I've never heard anybody talk about beautiful feet. I've heard people talk about those who have dainty feet. And I've heard folks talk about those who have clodhoppers, you know. But I haven't heard anybody talk about beautiful feet. You see, somebody says now, this preacher dresses so nicely, and to win the people and all. Well, I won't go into all those details, but I'm going to tell you this, that I'm careful about dressing so that people come up and compliment me the way I'm dressed. Now, if they compliment me for dressing like a gentleman, whether I'm a gentleman or not, I like to dress like one. And if they compliment me that, I think that's testimony for the Lord. I'm not talking about that. But through the years, when I've gone to the barber shop, it's been a long time since I've had the man at the barber shop shine my shoes. I tipped him real well, more than I think it would cost. I want him to know that I'm not staying away from it. But you know one reason I don't do it? It's because if somebody like that shines my shoes so that you look at them and they nearly put your eyes out, I find myself looking at my shoes all the time. And I don't want to do it. I don't want to be sidetracked. Let me look now and see. Yes, I think that's all right, but it's what I did. And what I do in shining my shoes won't put your eyes out, see? Beautiful feet, yeah, that's what the Bible talks about. Beautiful feet that spread the gospel of Christ, even to the uttermost part of the earth. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everybody here is saved and has beautiful feet? Beautiful feet. Well, you see, this does not contradict Romans 9. Romans 9 contains these strong passages on God's sovereignty and then these strong passages on man's responsibility. And I don't have to try to put them together. Let God put them together, but let me just take the whole thing. Then Romans 11:22 is another strong verse concerning man's responsibility. I'll let you go in a minute. Behold then the goodness and severity of God toward them that fell severity, but toward thee God's goodness, if thou continue in his goodness, otherwise thou also shalt be cut off. Boy, that's strong. Man's responsibility. You say, but God has chosen, God's elected. Yeah, that's true, but it doesn't contradict this, and this doesn't contradict God's election. Take them both, and don't try to put them together. Let God put them together. Listen also to Romans 11:23. For they also, if they continue not in their unbelief, shall be grafted in. For God is able to graft them in again. But you see, there's an if to that. If they continue not in their unbelief, God will graft them in again. And we need this because somebody who lays great stress on man's responsibility is apt to ignore the other. And someone who lays great stress on God's election is apt to ignore the other. But I won't do it if I just take the whole message of Romans. Whole message of Romans. That's my 10th general impression. Remarkable completeness. Pray for me that God will make me a complete Christian. Complete Christian. Especially, as I mentioned before, in my prayer life. A complete Christian in my prayer life. You say that means you pray a certain amount of time. Not necessarily. You can pray a certain amount of time and still not be complete in your prayer life. You can be very incomplete in your prayer life, still pray a lot. Make a complete Christian. I've given 10 general impressions of the book of Romans. The last one was connected with the letter R, remarkable completeness. By the way, some have suggested this trouble that I'm having, said it often starts with soreness of throat. And I noticed that I had sore throat at first. And he said it's not really a bug that's going around, but it's allergy. In the fall and in the early spring, early fall, early spring, you have this. With the pollen that's going around and all. How many of you have had something like this recently? Have you? Yeah. You can just watch that. And I forget the person who told me, but he said that the doctor gave him a certain medicine and that God used that just to cure him completely. of his allergy. I won't charge you anything extra for that. All right, lead us, let's see now. Yeah. My 11th general impression of the book of Romans is connected with the letter O. Overall summary. Put a hyphen between the word over and the word A-double-L. Overall summary. The book of Romans is a great summary book. Now you preachers, keep this in mind. There are certain books in the Bible that in a special way are great summary books. For example, Genesis is a great summary book. Exodus is a great summary book. Isaiah is a great summary book. It